Now, looking at the survey that you've just released, where are African consumers placing the greatest importance when it comes to banking?
Sure. Well, I think the three sort of key areas that they're placing significant importance. One is in trust, and we've done a lot in the survey to explore why customers trust their principal financial advisor. The other thing that's come out is convenience. Give it to me simple and straight in ways that I can understand and help me do my banking well. And the third is effectively a growth story, a growth in confidence that consumers have in their banks.
But what is driving that growth in confidence?
It's an interesting one. There are a number of things driving it, particularly banks that we think are taking more care over loyalty and over really trying to understand the customer and the segment they're in, and effectively sort of understanding the customer for who the customer is, as opposed to pushing products to them. That's a theme that I think we're beginning to see.
And in the survey, and I'm going to put you on the spot on this one,
sure.
In terms of indigenous versus multinationals versus other international brands that are regional banks that are setting up, expanding into other countries, which are the most popular ones? Are they the indigenous, are they the regional banks, are they the multinationals?
Okay, well, as you know, the survey actually covers a whole spread in terms of global survey, but in terms of Africa specifically, we've looked at international banking organizations, we've looked at telcos, who of course are entering into the banking market, and we've looked at all forms, if you like, of financial advice. It's difficult to detect because the questions were worded really around what do you think about your financial provider rather than necessarily who they are. But there's some very interesting trends, and probably the most powerful trend in Kenya is the growth of mobile banking. So actually I think it's 21% of Kenyans said, actually, I consider a mobile telco as my bank, which is an interesting evolution.
Talking of that figure, which I thought was very interesting, that is 21% Kenyans and against a global average of about 2%.
That's right,
and
very
just
different.
6 in Africa. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting phenomenon. I think there's only one other country that reported anywhere near that. And I think to my mind, that speaks to the entrepreneurialism that is around Kenya, frankly. I mean, who would have predicted the growth of this particular opportunity that sort of started a number of years ago and just grown, which is fantastic. I think from our perspective, the interesting issue is how it's built on trust. So a number of customers, when you ask them what are they doing in terms of telephone banking, are saying, well, it's mobile, clearly it's money transmission, it's statements, it's things I can access easily, but I still value a face-to-face relationship if I'm talking about large deposits of money or I want advice. So the interesting challenge for banks is how do you actually match that mobile, agile nature? And for telcos, how do you think about how you might expand into a more advice-centric model?
Well, 7 years ago when Safaricom launched M-Pesa, which is their mobile money transfer service, banks were very cautious and they went up in arms and they were trying to fight it. Now you're seeing them all riding on mobile banking because, in fact, I want to quote a comment here where it said 93% of the global customers cited that they're happy and they're looking at how they are treated. That is the key driver for them when they're relating with the banks. But the Kenyans, on the other hand, they're looking at what they're calling my ability to withdraw money, especially on the mobile phone, on the ATM platform. How then does this now shape up going forward?
Well, I think you've mentioned a really key challenge for banks in particular, and we've seen obviously recent announcements in terms of banks and what they're doing further. I think the key issue is interoperability. How do you actually allow the service on the mobile phone to work off an ATM, to work online, and basically what we call the omni-channel experience. So if I've started with M-Pesa, but I've actually got a main bank as well, how do I make sure that I can make money transmission effective and seamless? But that's moving forward, and I think one of the things that retailers and the retail end of the telcos have introduced into the whole mix is the whole concept of loyalty. And I think that's going to be an interesting trend going forward because customers are saying, particularly Kenyan customers, I like that. I like an organisation that understands me, that knows me.
One-stop shop.
Exactly, that's right. But gives me some credit for the length of relationship that I've had and recognises that I may have a phone relationship, an ATM relationship, or a relationship in the branch, which of course from a back office perspective may be difficult to achieve, but as far as a Kenyan is concerned, well, that's what I want to see.
Now in Kenya, one of the aspects that we've seen, banks are not necessarily investing in brick and mortar. They're now looking for agency banking. They look for a small shop owner somewhere and they actually start doing their deposits and withdrawals and small time transactions with a small shop. So they're not necessarily having branches. How then does that shape up in the future? And is it just peculiar to Kenya? Are we seeing other markets also doing that?
No, I think we are seeing other markets doing that. I think there's a very good examples of other agencies that are being used. And typically, as you know, what's happening there is banks are often saying, how can we actually get closer to our customer? How can we effectively offer them services exactly where they are, whether they're shopping, whether they're doing whatever they're doing? How can we make it more convenient for them? And I think if you can do that correctly, then you can can combine two things. You can combine trust in a financial institution that's got the weight and the strength and the energy that you want and the security, but also the agility of someone you know locally and who also knows you. So there's a number of retail models in terms of sort of small stallholders where I think that's a very exciting way forward effectively.